So, welcome to the highlight of the day. There's the diagnostics panel. If you are here, you're probably interested in diagnostics. Certainly we are as well. This is a very interesting area, and the way we're going to kick this panel off, we've all coordinated with one another to try to make sure that we leave enough time for questions and answers, or people to ask these folks for money. Any of those things are possible. But to start, what I will do is ask my colleagues on the panel to briefly introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their fund in order to just kick things off. So I'm going to start with Wouter, who's right next to me.
Hi.
From Illumina.
Illumina Ventures.
Illumina Ventures.
Right.
Yes, you keep correcting me every time I do this. I know, sorry.
Anyway, so I'm with Illumina Ventures. So Illumina Ventures is a VC firm based in San Francisco. We launched our first fund in April last year, and we just finished fundraising. So we've raised $230 million. As you may have guessed from the name, Illumina is one of our investors, but one of many. So it's important to point out that we're not part of Illumina. We're not a strategic investor. We invest for the benefit of all our investors, so not for Illumina's benefit. That said, our focus is very much on early stage genomics companies, anything to do with genomics, tools, diagnostics, therapeutics, and other areas that have been transformed by NGS in particular. And genomics we interpret in the broadest possible sense, so it's not just healthcare, it's also agriculture, industrial markets, synthetic biology, and so on. As I said, we're early stage investor. Most of our investments will be at the Series A stage. We can do a little bit earlier, a little bit later. Typical check size is between $3 and $5 million, and we plan to invest between $50 and $20 million over the lifetime of the company.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane.
So I'm a managing partner and co-founder of Diagnostics, which is a recently launched venture capital firm based out of Italy, investing mainly all over Europe, but also in the US and in Israel, as far as companies have at some point some European angle, European strategy. The idea to launch the product in Europe, for example. Mainly it's med-tech. We also do a little bit of digital healthcare. Of course, IVD, diagnostic, we do in vivo, in vitro. We look at companies in all spaces. We raise a $100 million fund from strategic investors as well as financial investors. Strategic investors have only a very small portion of the fund. They are disclosed on our website. They have no specific right, and we are very strict about confidentiality if it's needed, while the opposite, if there is any opportunity to do business together, we have good reach, of course. We have 5 investments so far, as I said, out of 18-month activity, so we have a good almost 4 investment per year pace. We'll keep that until the end of this first fund. We're also at the moment actively raising for a second fund in biotech.
Perfect. Alex.
Hi, Alex Winter, happy to be here, just from down the street in Boston, with GE Ventures. GE Ventures invests in healthcare, advanced manufacturing, software, and energy. I'm obviously on the healthcare side. In healthcare, we invest in everything besides drugs and implants, so we try to avoid anything that goes into the body on a full-time basis, primarily to avoid regulatory risk. The things that we do invest in are obviously clinical diagnostics, that's why I'm here on the panel, but also precision medicine in general, so life science instrumentation, data analytics, healthcare IT, and non-invasive medical devices. There are 5 of us altogether on the healthcare team, 2 of us here in Boston, 3 in Menlo Park, where GE Ventures is headquartered. And the 5 of us are looking to invest about $50 million a year. And the $50 million a year number with 5 investors means we tend to do slightly later stage companies, with Series A being typically where we might first engage with a company, looking to write between $3 and $10 million checks with an initial check size, but we support the company all the way through. And then, well, we can also talk later, both maybe Wouter is less strategic imperatives, but corporate funds typically sort of lie somewhere on the financial strategic spectrum. We are more towards the financial side, where the actual strategic validation we need to have with GE is relatively light, where we just basically are trying to answer the question of why is GE investing in this startup, and as long as we have a suitable answer to that, we can make the investment.
Great, and last but not least, Adam.
Sure. So I'm with Canapa Healthcare. We are a late-stage venture and growth equity firm. Well, I'm in New York, and we have offices in Miami as well. We focus on medical device and diagnostics companies, and generally commercial stage companies, or with some evidence of commercial traction. We're agnostic to the subsector within healthcare. For us, it's about, not surprisingly, a large unmet need and addressable market. But really backed by data, particularly with diagnostics, making sure that there's strong clinical validation and clinical utility data is very important for us. We have our typical investments, initial investment sizes, let's say 5 to 7 million initially. We reserve up to about $20 million to invest in the life of the fund. We're an evergreen structure, which is a bit different for us, which frees us up from some of the constraints of timing that some of our peer funds have. And the fund itself is managed by three of us. We're part of a broader, we're a little over $100 million fund, part of a broader Canapa organization, which has a number of funds outside of healthcare, mostly actually public equity funds. And our healthcare fund is managed by three of us. I'm a physician by training, but the three of us are ex-consultants, and so for better or worse, that means we like to get involved with our portfolio companies, and so we like to invest and take a board seat over those.
Good, and I'm Tom Miller. I have the privilege of facilitating this panel. Greybird Ventures is also a fairly new fund. We only started investing at the beginning of 2016. We invest only in companies that do diagnostics in some form. It can be in vivo, in vitro, or IT, but it has to be something involved with characterizing the patient's condition more precisely. Also early stage, Series A typically, although we're not particularly religious people. And our check sizes, we're about to make our fourth investment. Those check sizes have been between 3 million at the low end and 10 million at the high end. So somewhat similar to some of my colleagues. But now we'll kick off the fun part. I don't know how my colleagues have evergreens or big companies behind them, and some people actually raise money. But when we went out to raise a fund and said to people, we're just doing diagnostics, I mean, I can tell you, I got rejected a lot. I mean, I think more often than in high school, it was really, really cool. And diagnostics is a tricky place, and so. It's a tricky place for investors, it's a tricky place for entrepreneurs, but to try to characterize the trickiness, I'm going to use the brain power that's on this panel to help me. Because I would love to know why I was rejected so often. So let's talk about diagnostic investing for a moment. I'm actually going to start with Alex. Alex, what makes diagnostics special?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that makes diagnostics special is that nobody's willing to pay for it. I'm just going to plug this really quickly. I wrote a paper or an article on exactly this. It's in MedCity News. It was published last month. You can look it up. But it was actually about why there's an increasing amount of investment in diagnostics. So there's two things in diagnostics. One is that everybody talks about how terrible an investment in diagnostics has been historically, partially because nobody ever pays for it. So these companies just churn through tremendous amounts of capital, commercializing a test that nobody pays for. And so and we've seen it before with some of our own portfolio companies where they burn through $200-300 million. And realistically, at the end of the day, they'll be acquired for $100 to $200 million. And obviously that math doesn't really work out for investors, which is why investors have historically stayed away from the space. And yet, despite the fact that it's a terrible area for investment and investors sort of uniformly hate it when you talk to them, 2017 is going to be the biggest year ever for diagnostic investment. Interesting paradox there. But I'm just going to leave it at that and let my other panelists talk.
Alex has just posed a conundrum I don't understand whatsoever. Can you explain that at all? Can you explain what he just said?
Well, it said there's no money on the table, and if I may, there's no money on the table twice, because not only it's a question of reimbursement, but it's also a question of acquirer. It's on the M&A side, the activity is very little, and the valuations are just very low on average. And so it's all a question of money again. So that's not very encouraging. And if I may also add something, another reason why it's not very encouraging, although I'm an investor, so, but you're asking us to challenge, right? So the other reason is the famous chicken and egg paradigm that we see in diagnostic. I mean, everything that's not there and it's innovative will change the rule of the game, but then the evidence base is built out of something that is different in diagnostic. What's the standard of care, and then how do you rebuild the evidence-based therapy out of a new concept of diagnostic? It's very challenging. Having said that, I still believe there are a few cases where it's very strong. Actually, out of the 5 companies we have in portfolio at the moment, 2 are diagnostic companies.
So Diana and Alex have just said that, you know, the area that you're investing in, Wouter, is not very a great place to be. So why did you take this job? I mean, tell us a little bit about how you were expecting to change this paradigm. Because I imagine you're challenged with actually making a return, right?
Sure. Well, what I didn't mention in my introduction is that we are, unlike yourself, not a pure diagnostics investor. In fact, it's probably rare for us to invest in a pure diagnostic company. The companies that we do like to invest in tend to be platform companies that at the stage of investment don't consider themselves as pure diagnostic companies, but they have a platform that has broader usage and a path towards being a diagnostic. So they can sell their platform into either the academic market or the pharmaceutical market to sort of get traction, get sales, whilst developing a diagnostic test on the platform.
So you look for a sort of a dual path, something that
Absolutely.
can get you some uplift, get you some wind speed, and then launch a diagnostic on top of that.
And NGS is sort of a perfect example of that as a platform.
Adam, are you as negative as the rest of my colleagues on the panel about this stuff? Because I'm getting depressed.
So I'll add one more data point that I was just reading yesterday to add to the irony that in addition to more investment going to the space, despite all the negative sentiment, it's actually among med tech, diagnostics is the largest area. At least I think this is public company data. I don't remember the specifics, but it was the largest area and the highest growth area. So it's still, you know, in terms of sales. So there's a lot of negativity, but they still sell a lot of these tests. I think for us, so yes, the answer is yes, we are often negative, but I think the way that I think about it is, and the optimism that I have is that the clinical medicine is someone who comes from clinical medicine, we're way behind where the science is. And that's really the issue here, I think. That there's a lot of very interesting tests out there that tell you some very detailed information, but no one's paying for it because the doctors don't really, in the clinic, don't know what to do with it. And so it leaves some good opportunities, but they may be what you consider to be boring tests. I think we don't have many diagnostics investments. We've looked at a lot. And our diagnostics investment, to be frank, is a boring test, but it works, it has validated data and it answers a clear clinical question. A classic example I always give is like an Oncotype DX. Ours is an analog to Oncotype DX for endocrine treatment for breast cancer, but that answers a question: will I benefit from chemotherapy or not? And it's in the guideline. Oncotype DX is in the guidelines, and it doesn't tell you every mutation on a tumor, but it's something that the doctors can use and it can get paid as a result. So I think that there are opportunities, but but certainly the excitement and the science are not those opportunities from an investment perspective, unfortunately.
So let me be the wild-eyed optimist on this panel, since heck, I started a company to invest only in diagnostics, so I better have had a reason. I actually think if you look historically, everything that Alex said was unfortunately true. I can't disagree with a word he said, or any of my other fellow panel members. I do think, however, there are a couple of tailwinds that might go behind diagnostics that, to me, caused me to create greater ventures. The tailwinds are, first of all, our knowledge of the biology of disease. 100 years ago, if you came into a physician and you were weak and anemic, you had a disease of the blood. 80 years ago, you had leukemia or lymphoma. 60 years ago, you had 3 types of leukemia, 2 types of lymphoma. Today, you are almost at 100 different types of blood cancers. If you are not able to characterize which one you have, the treatment will be wrong. There is nothing worse for either a healthcare system or a patient to treat someone for a condition they do not have. So A, our knowledge of biology is trending in a direction where diagnostics becomes more important. Secondly, if you look at the biotech wave, the thing that caused biotech investments to soar, it was the thing called Eroom's law, right? You have this scissors between decreasing productivity in large R&D firms or increasing expensive and decreasing productivity. And you saw this for years before all of a sudden the companies started to acquire at higher multiples at earlier stages. If you take a look at diagnostic companies, their top lines are not growing that fast. Their R&D expenses are continuing to increase. Their productivity measured in FDA approvals are continuing to go down. We actually see a possible bellwether of an Eroom's law happening in diagnostics. You may be wrong, we'll see. But it could presage a potential era where diagnostics increases in value, and if so, we hope to be there. But that said, it's a tricky space. It's a tricky space in which the amount of money you have to put in for a clinical trial is a lot. You must be a hell of a lot more capital efficient at how you run your companies than if you were a pharmaceutical company where you go and they have fancy paintings on the wall and a grand piano in the lobby. We can't do that in the diagnostics world, can't afford that stuff. It's a different world. But I think the majority of you are in this audience for one reason only. You want their money. Right? How many people here want their money? Raise your hand. I thought so. A lot of people want their money. So I think if we are going to be an interesting panel helping you folks, what we should do is pose the most appropriate question to the folks here. Adam, how do these folks get your money? What do they need to be like? What do they need to do? What do they have to show you in order for you to write a big, fat, lovely check?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I alluded to it when I was speaking before. I mean, we need to see data. So the test should be validated, and there should be data behind it that demonstrates some clinical utility, that it changes physician behavior, that there's health economic benefit. But that's, I mean, that's fundamental for us. And that, look, you could have, and if you have reimbursement already from CMS or from some, that's great. But CMS, what they give it, they can take it away too by reinterpreting. So that's great to have that. But if you have the data, the strong data behind it, or a path to get on guidelines and the right kind of data to get on guidelines and get reimbursement, that's really what we're looking for. But a lot of it for us is that clinical utility. Is it going to change the behavior in the clinic?
Diane.
Yes, certainly data is relevant. But if I may add something that is sometimes obvious to us to us venture and venture capitalists, and we don't see much in some of the pitches, especially when it's early and it's the early days. 2 things. The one thing is simply the standard of care for educational purpose, like educational to the investors, but sometimes to the team as well. I mean, the standard of care, and it's the patient path into the standard of care, how something gets diagnosed. I mean, is that because of symptoms and the patient goes to see a physician? What kind of physician? What's the referral? What kind of other biomarker has it been tested on? And what kind of diagnosis in the end is valuable? These accompanying data are, of course, the only valuable, which are the predictive values, the negative and the positive. And so many times I see diagnostic companies which don't have those numbers ready, even though they have sensitivity and specificity. It's just because they didn't have clear their patient path, and they cannot tell the population how it looks like, the population at each point through the patient path. And the second thing is the positioning. A biomarker, a biomarker can be helpful to predict, can be helpful to diagnose, can be helpful to follow up on a therapy. If you have that clear since the very beginning where you want to start from, and then the same biomarker could be used in other applications, but if you have that clear since the very beginning, I think you'll be much more successful with investors, saying my strategy is to start with is to go there, this is the standard of care, this is what I want to replace, this is the decision making, that how the decision making of the therapist will change based on what I can bring as an innovation to the market. If that is 100% clear to the team, most of the time, at least from first meeting into due diligence, it's a given step.
I agree with all that. I think, again, because we're slightly different, we are very much, in order to get a foot in the door with us, I think we need to be blown away by science and technology, because we tend to invest more in sort of underlying platforms, as I mentioned. So we like end market diversity, tools that can be used not just in diagnostics but other markets as well. And really, if the science and technology is disruptive, revolutionary, that's really what captures our attention.
And there's no money that's better than GE's money. So Alex, how do they get GE's money? Because those are deep.
Yes.
Those are deep pockets.
Deep, we have deep
Those
pockets.
are deep.
Us and Google. Try to get Google's money too. Well, so I would mirror Adam's comments with certainly clinical utility is helpful. Health economics is key. So in order to get anyone to pay for your test, you have to demonstrate why they should pay for your test. You shouldn't just be purely additive to the system. To the GE point, one thing that we do like to hear is, we've thought about why we want GE's money. It's because we want to work with your ultrasound group, we want to work with your MRI group, we want to work with your, one of those, to not just be treating us as any other investor. And I know there's lots of investors you talk to, that's okay, we want to feel special. You should say we've actually thought why we want GE's money. We see a strong strategic connection to GE. We would love to have GE, let's say, be sort of the reflex test. Maybe you have a ultrasound or a mammogram, and then you would first get a GE mammogram, and then you would be using our test to determine whether or not the suspicious finding is in fact malignant. That would actually go a long way to getting a second meeting with GE.
Great. I'd like to add, from my standpoint, what doesn't impress us. The 5-year business plan, where you see this incredible hockey stick of growth in year 3, which all of a sudden turns you into a phenomenal cash machine. The only thing I know about your business plan is that it's wrong. They're all wrong. And therefore, you really want to see that at least the costs are planned out really precisely. We know you can calculate those well, but you should be solving a really meaty problem. We in Graybird have actually spent time creating a list of what we call grand challenges in diagnostics. We're not going to tell you what those are. They're proprietary to our company. And we've actually given up on a couple of them already. But, but that said, we look at things that are really, really important problems. I'll give you one of them. If a company came to us and said, hey, we have solved the following problems in sepsis. We have a diagnostic that can tell you the difference between a viral, bacterial, and fungal infection. We can do it without culturing. We can do it at a low cost of goods. We can tell you what is causing the infection. We can do it within a half an hour at the point of care. And by the way, we'll tell you about resistance as well. And we'll do all of that at once. I'd say, damn it, you got a home run. You have our money. Right? So we look at the clinical problem holistically. We look at a diagnostic that's positioned well to do this, and then we tend to be, like Wouter, we will spend a phenomenal amount of time on the science. There are so many technologies chasing the same problem, and they're not all going to win. So if you come to us, be prepared. We're going to challenge your science a lot. It's okay to say, I don't know, but you better be followed with, I don't know, but here's how we're going to know very soon with the following actions. So that's what we look at. we tend not to micromanage the P&L because they tend to be all wrong. Now, one last thing before we open this up to questions. This questions is always the fun part of this session. I would like to ask each of the panel members briefly, if you were to make one big prediction about the diagnostics world, and this is a surprise question. We didn't coordinate. They didn't prepare an answer. If you were to make a surprise prediction 5 years from now in diagnostics, something that you think is going to happen that no one's going to expect, what would you predict? Alex?
A Theranos-like model will actually succeed.
That's a good one. That was a good answer. Remember, you didn't prepare. Now, just give the rest of you more time to think, Diana.
Big revolution in CNS driven by diagnostics.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Thanks. Don't look surprised.
CMS will pay for everything.
Now you're just fantasizing. That's not right.
I think we'll see more point of care tests, actually. I think that there's going to be, I think we'll see more validated, useful point of care tests.
Whole genome sequencing reimbursed for every patient. Everyone gets sequenced at birth, and then as part of standard diagnosis.
10 years rather than
5 years. He's saying 5 years.
5 years.
So I'll do mine. There will be at least one medical procedure in which the diagnostician, if he's not using a computer to aid their knowledge, will be malpractice. That's one. We are now going to open this up to questions. Bombard us with your most difficult, challenging questions. There's a prize. It goes to anyone that asks a question that causes a fist fight among the panelists. So go. Questions. Anyone in the audience? Yes?
Alex, you started by saying this was going to be the year of breakout for diagnostic investment. Could you explain that?
Oh, I just mean in particular, this year has more investing dollars, more venture dollars going into diagnostics than any other year in history.
Why?
Why? So you should read my article. MedCity News, August 23rd.
There's no time to be plugging your books or articles.
I don't get paid. I'm getting residual. Well, in particular, there are a couple of major investments, like so Grail raised $900 million. That certainly went some of the way towards there. The overall underlying trend seems to be that at least for a lot of the diagnostic platforms, they based their diagnostics on next generation sequencing, which is a well-documented improvement trajectory. And that has led in turn to, for a lot of these diagnostic companies, faster reimbursement and in turn better returns for investors, and has led to sort of a gold rush into particular areas of diagnostics based on NGS. And those two areas are prenatal diagnostics and cancer. So there's been a huge amount of capital invested into cell-free DNA companies. And that's been a lot of the funding.
There's recently lots of few years, lots of talk about using artificial intelligence to replace diagnostic pathologists or at least support them. What do you think of that? Basically, you don't need any, sequencing omics. Put it in, it will tell you what disease you have. They tell you what drug to go.
So let me take a stab at this one, and maybe we'll start at this fight. I think that trend is going to go slower than most people think. The problem, if you look at most data mining, it's a bunch of linear regressions networked together. I mean, the math isn't so incredibly awesome. Most of the time, it's math that's hundreds of years old. That said, what's really critical is the validation of the data that goes into the algorithms. And that tends to be really, really hard. The validation can be screwed up by uncertainties on ontologies, uncertainties in the structure of metadata, look at the disaster that happened with Watson at MD Anderson, that project. I mean, that project crashed and burned, not because Watson is a crappy piece of software or MD Anderson doesn't know what they're doing in cancer. Neither of those statements are true. It's the fact that they tried to take data which had ill-defined endpoints and had huge amounts of uncertainty, and the propagation of the uncertainty in the map was never considered. If you don't propagate uncertainty, you don't know how certain your answer is, you get garbage. So to me, validating the data input is much more critical than the algorithm used to answer it. That said, I'm bullish that it actually happens.
I mean, I agree. It's one of those things like reimbursement for whole genome sequencing that's going to happen. Sooner or later, it's inevitable, right? It's so obvious, but it's going to take longer than reimbursement for whole genome sequencing. It's going to take longer than people think. But I mean, all the companies that we invest in tend to have a big, AI component to it. These days, have a company without machine learning team, so it is becoming increasingly important.
Any other comments on the?
Yeah, I mean, so we actually have invested in a company which had the first FDA approval for use of an AI algorithm in a diagnostic, and that is Arteris. Now, it's not the traditional diagnostic; it's an image-based diagnostic. They base it on MRIs, cardiac MRIs, and they actually have an FDA approval for using AI to have a self-improving algorithm around cardiac diagnosis. So I think in terms of AI as applied to diagnostics, you'll see it in some places faster than others, and obviously you're seeing it in imaging analytics first, because you have these self-driving Teslas around. You just apply that Tesla algorithm to a cardiac image, and you might have something interesting. And you can imagine it can come to other areas of diagnostics as well, and it will.
I do think the regulatory challenges are also in front of us. I mean, the better the algorithms get and the more useful they get at actually more than just guide, but lead physicians to certain diagnostic behaviors, the more the FDA is going to start to want to scrutinize it and scrutinize it heavily. So I think we haven't yet hit the real regulatory challenge that this will come. Any thoughts from your side, Em?
I mean, I think that, I'd agree, this is going to take a lot longer for a number of reasons and barriers from regulatory to pushback from the different stakeholders involved to reimbursement. So there's a lot of barriers, but we may have a slow march there. I mean, we've seen occasionally we'll see an opportunity that is in this space, like a more of an imaging type of a diagnostic. So they're coming, but it's going to be a long time, I think, until it's ready for prime time, so to speak.
Any disagreements?
No, actually, I'm in agreement. And no, everything that he is very much operator dependent as a biomarker, so imaging, of course, and will probably evolve. But there are a few applications that are already here, and I don't see that to be very far down the line. I think that's happening today, so I'm more optimistic maybe.
Great. I'm sorry. That's indicate that I'm supposed to worry about something about time. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. We can do this. Good.
Yes.
Go.
Can you talk a little bit about what's the parameters around investing in diagnostics? What's your expected timetable to get a return? Do you have an expectation of how much you'll devote to each company in your investment? And what's your expectation for the X on a diagnostic? I think there tends to be kind of buckets in therapeutics. Diagnostics, we understand, is different, but understanding your expectations would be very helpful.
That's a great question. Let me start with you, Ben.
Yeah, well, both very much depends on the stage we invest in. So if we go seed, we can normally our reasoning is around a time horizon that could be up to 7-8 years. But I mean, that's when we go seed. When we go on A, B, or C round, we tend to be positioning the exit on a much shorter time frame. Same for the multiple. The problem is that valuations are never going to skyrocket here in diagnostic, so we tend to be very conservative in entry value when we invest in.
Yeah, so we come in typically later, and maybe it's 3-ish years until break even, because we'll come in when there's some early evidence of commercial. They're starting to sell, but maybe they're just starting to get commercial contracts from Medicare. And so there's a number of other clinical data studies that may be going on at that time to try to get that. And then that takes time to get more contracts, to get on guidelines, as to how they need. So, I mean, it's going to be probably at least 3 years, even though we come in later. And we also have kind of our evaluation expectations are it's important to get it low for the same reason you said.
We like to see, break even in 3 to 5 year time frame. Valuations are lower, but I think it's also fair to say that the risks are lower as well in diagnostics relative to therapeutics.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of capital to deploy, we're between 3 and 15 we'd expect in any one company. That's obviously a wide range, but some companies need more than others. And then I would say 3 to 7 years. I think if it got towards 7 years, people with upper levels would start getting a little patient with us. And then I think we're sort of targeting a 3 to 5x return.
So for Greybird, it's, I had said that we thus far between 3 and 10, so 15 would be about where we start to get a little nervous about committing more money to a single company. That said, I lied a little bit. We actually don't commit all of the money up at once. We look at milestones, and because the valuations ultimately in diagnostics certainly have not yet mostly reached the stratospheric levels of biotech, we tend to look to reach inflection points at each of our milestones that make us feel comfortable that we're making solid valuation progress. We would love to be put in the position that 3 years after an initial investment, we have to scratch our heads and say, should we start to socialize this company for a potential exit, or should we double down and put more money in because we see a potential for something larger? So to us, it's less a matter of time and more a matter of pathway. Do we see the increase in valuation that we expect to see, and are people hitting those kinds of milestones? We are critical about cash employed. Because once again, if you throw too much money in, you can easily find yourself in a place where you're never going to get your money back. So running efficiently and lean is very critical for diagnostic companies.
Alex, I would just add one point. I mean, I think I would second with our project. I'd second that. There could be an initial tranche or an initial round, and that may, like I say, be 5 to 10 million. But at other milestones, we're going to look at the whole thing all over again. Maybe that it's a whole new investment case, and if we have to invest another 5 or 10 million, that can be okay. Whereas there may be another company where we put a lot more in initially and don't want to. It's not about the total amount in as much as is there a path forward. And we actually we run forward-looking IRRs from today, and that's how we think about it. And we just went through this exercise with our companies. So
absolutely. There's a question here. Nope. Any other questions? Yes.
So how do you think, when you go out and you sell your fund, how do you talk to people about where you think the amount of diagnostic spending will be 5 or 10 years from now compared to, as a percent of healthcare or total dollars? Do you have a fundamental belief that you convince people it's going to double or triple, or are you saying we're going to pick the winners and it's always going to be a top that's not growing too quickly?
The question is actually whether I believe what I say to. But before I do that,
help you some
There's a camera.
No, that's why I may not answer the question. But you have to raise money, Diane. What do you tell people about it?
Actually, I don't tell that number. That's an interesting one, but it's not in my pitch. But the way when I explain why we do diagnostic, of course, we're gonna select the winners. And if the question is if I believe it will become a bigger, yes, I think it will increase proportionally in the amount of money spent in healthcare in general. Because yes, there are plenty of trends that are going in that direction, and then sooner or later sequencing will be reimbursed. So.
So you have to get some money from folks other than the name of the.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Paul, I can't say what fraction will be spent on diagnostics, but I think I agree that you know, not the same thing, but diagnostics in general is definitely is a way to rein in spending on therapeutics. Better stratification of patients is going to be key.
You don't have to ask.
We don't have to ask. Well, we do kind of have to ask. We have to ask you.
How do I become you?
I know, it's pretty nice. We don't have to no, but we do have to justify, just on a case-by-case basis, as we make an investment in a diagnostics company, why we believe this company will, you know, grow to a reasonable size and exit and return our capital and then some.
So I do the following, and it's I do not answer that question directly. I'd be foolish to try to do so. So I did the following. I showed the typical graphs of every country in the world showing a continued growth as a percent of GDP of healthcare expenditures. And if a trend cannot continue indefinitely, it won't. So therefore, the question is, what levers do societies have in order to decrease expenses in healthcare without adversely affecting their patient population, which causes them as politicians to get kicked out of office? And the only way to do that is to stop expenditures on things, on treatments, which are either unnecessary, not productive, or maybe even dangerous and deleterious to the patient's condition. And the only way you do that is with diagnostics. It is clearly the path to the future. And with that, if you have some money and you want to put it in our fund, or words. Any other closing thoughts from anyone on the panel? Have we answered all of your questions? Yeah. Since there is 5 minutes left, we're going to have 5 minutes for you to rush it forward and try to get money out of the wallets of each of my colleagues. Good. Thank you very much for your attention.